What's happening, guys? I'm TechSource, and today I'm going to show you how to properly maintain a water-cooled system. Let's say you're very interested in getting into water-cooled PCs, but you don't know what it takes to properly maintain one, or maybe you're just bored out of your mind. Well, either way, you're in the right place. I'm going to be doing 3 different things in this video. I'm going to show you how to properly flush your entire system, how to drain the liquid completely, and fill it back up. And it's actually a lot easier than you might think. So with that said, sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. So this is the PC I'll be using for the demonstration in this video. It is Mini Red, the most powerful mini ITX water-cooled system I've built on the channel. If you guys missed it, definitely check it out. It was a super fun build to do, but we got the 9900K in here with 32 gigabytes of RAM and the Asus Strix 2080 Ti. Pretty decent specs for Minesweeper, if you ask me. It's also recommended to do maintenance on your system anywhere between 6 to 12 months. That's usually a good range. Think of it like your baby, right? Every time it gets dirty, you gotta change its diapers. Otherwise, if you don't, then it's gonna start crying and then keep you up at night, and then one day you wake up and it's dead. But anyway, these are the parts that we're gonna be using to do the maintenance. I'll go over every single one of them, starting with the EK leak tester kit. This thing is an absolute must, not only for building a PC, but also draining the liquid out of it. I'll show you guys how to use it in the video. To make the draining process as easy and convenient as possible, we're gonna use a compression fitting along with the appropriate size soft tubing, and then whatever liquid that we're gonna pour in the system. So in this case, we're gonna be flushing it with distilled water, and then I'm gonna fill it back up with clear coolant from these guys at Mod My Mods. And of course, once we're done with everything, we do have to fill the system back up, and that is where the funnel comes in handy, or you can pick up a fill bottle as well. And finally, you will definitely need this. This is a Psu Jumper. We're gonna need this little guy just to power on the pump instead of having to turn on the entire system. It's gonna make the draining and flushing process so much easier. And once again, guys, all of this will make sense as we get into the video. So if you're confused right now, don't worry about it. It will make sense very soon. All right, so now it's time to drain your system. So go ahead and locate the drain valve. Typically, it's always located on the lowest part of your loop. So mine is over here on the bottom right of this massive distro plate. If your PC does not have a drain valve, I want you guys to pay attention very carefully. I want you to grab your PC with both hands, make sure you don't drop it, walk to the closest window in your house and toss it out the window. Because why on earth would you build a water-cooled system without a drain valve? That makes no sense. It's like if God created humans without a pee hole. There has to be a port where we can drain the coolant conveniently. So if you guys are watching this video before you even build your water-cooled system, please, for the love of God, you will thank me later, include a drain valve. All right, so now that we located our drain valve, we're gonna hook up our compression fitting and our soft tube. By the way, guys, your drain valve might look something like this with an actual handle on the top. If your handle is perpendicular like this, that means the valve is closed and no liquid can go through it. And when you rotate it so it's parallel, that's when the valve opens up, and that's when liquid can start flowing through. Keep that in mind. We're gonna separate the compression fitting, and I'm gonna plug this end inside the drain valve. So once that's in, we can hook up the soft tubing. So once the tube is on the fitting, you can go ahead and lock it with the cap. All right, guys, so we are officially ready to drain the system. I have the tube running down to an empty bucket. You guys can use a bucket or a bowl or even an empty water gallon, whatever you guys have laying around the house. Just make sure you don't spill it anywhere on your carpet. This was from building Big Red version 3. I've spilled so much coolant on the damn carpet. It's looking like a crime scene, to be honest. But yeah, learn from my mistakes, guys, and make sure your tube is long enough so that at least 1 or 2 feet of it is deep inside the bucket. Next up, we are going to twist the handle and let the coolant flow right through. There we go, slowly but surely. Alright, so you guys can clearly see that there is no more coolant coming out of the PC, but we still have so much more coolant left in the system. What we're gonna do is let some air inside the system so that it can help push the rest of the coolant out. What we're gonna do is go back to our reservoir, in my case it's the distro plate, and we're going to slowly release the top plug. What this is gonna do is it's gonna let some air back inside the system, and it's gonna help push some coolant out. There you go. All right, so now we are ready to officially flush the system out. It's okay if you guys still have some coolant left in there. That is not gonna matter because we're gonna flush everything out using good old distilled water. The point of the flush is to clean your system and get rid of all of the red coolant that's inside there, because I told you guys earlier that we are switching over to clear coolant. Now there are two ways you can flush out the coolant. You can use the power supply that's already inside your PC, or you can use a spare power supply. But I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this don't have spare power supplies laying around, so we're gonna be using a power supply that's already inside the system. Before you guys do anything, make sure the cable is unplugged from the power supply and the switch is set to off. First thing we're gonna do is disconnect the cables from the motherboard. Make sure you are disconnecting the 8-pin EPC connector, the 24-pin ATX cable. This one's actually in a tough spot because of the tubing, so your system, I'm sure, won't be as difficult. And finally, the GPU cables as well. Remember the power supply jumper we talked about earlier in the video? We're gonna plug this straight into the 24-pin cable. This is gonna trick the power supply into thinking it's actually plugged into a motherboard. All right, now we're ready to plug the power supply cable back inside, but make sure the power supply is still switched to off. Do not power it on just yet. All right guys, now the fun part. We're gonna start pouring in distilled water inside our system. So I'm going to be using this fill bottle for convenience. I'm going to close this up. We're going to grab our fill bottle and start filling up the system with water. Obviously, if you guys have a reservoir set up, then you can use the top port of your reservoir to fill your system. Make sure it's nicely topped off. Once it reaches the top, we can remove the fill bottle. We're gonna put our hand behind the power supply where the switch is, and we're gonna keep it there. We're gonna turn the system on, and we're gonna wait about 10-15 seconds and let the pump do its thing and circulate the water back inside the system. So here we go. Whatever you guys do, do not let the pump run dry. Now we can go back to the power supply, shut it off. We're gonna open up the drain valve. I'll start draining the coolant again. We're gonna close it back up and then rinse and repeat until the coolant is no more. Go back to the power supply, turn it on. You guys can probably tell how much the coolant has diluted. It's no longer a red color. Doesn't even match the cables anymore. We're basically going to rinse and repeat these steps until there is no more colored coolant inside our system. Now obviously this is going to take a long time. It's a very tedious task because you have to constantly fill the system, let it run for a little bit, drain the system, rinse and repeat. So I'm going to show you guys a different way, a much faster way of doing this. So because I'm using a massive distro plate, it's going to be a little more difficult compared to a standard reservoir to drain the system. So in order for this to be very effective, I have to tilt the PC at a 45-degree angle and use this tiny funnel on the top port. Alright, so here's the best way to flush your system. So make sure your drain valve is closed and top off your reservoir with distilled water. You can leave the pump on the entire time. You don't have to shut it off during this process, which is the main reason why it's much faster than the previous method. Once the reservoir is topped off, wait for the fresh water to cycle through the system anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes. Afterwards, open the drain valve once again and let some of the liquid out of your system while making sure your reservoir doesn't get too low. Once again, it's really important that you don't let the pump run dry, otherwise it can overheat and damage your pump. As you can see in the video, I'm only letting a little bit of fluid out of the system before closing the valve and topping off the system once again. So to recap, top off your system with distilled water, wait 2 to 3 minutes for the water to cycle through your system, drain a little bit of it out, close the valve, rinse and repeat until you're satisfied with the color of your water. Alright guys, so after 2 full gallons of distilled water, this is how clear the distilled water looks in our loop. We can still see some buildup around the rubber gaskets, and when you look at the GPU block, we can see some buildup over here as well where the jet stream is, and this is completely normal, especially if the coolant's been sitting in the system for almost 6 months. You know, there's really not much you can do with just distilled water in getting these out. This is the main reason why a lot of people stick with distilled water in their loop, so they can avoid situations like this. And I always tell everyone, if you guys are going to go with solid coolant in your PC, make sure to stick with solid coolant. If you transition from solid coolant to distilled water or clear coolant, this is what you're gonna deal with. The best way to get rid of the buildup inside your blocks is to actually take them apart and clean them by hand, which is a completely different topic. I did do a video on this. If you guys wanna check it out, I'll drop a link to it down below. All right, so once you're happy with the results, it's time to shut off the power supply. I'm gonna go ahead and check the color of the water one last time. So I'm gonna drain just a little bit. So this is the final color of the distilled water inside the system. As you guys can see, it does have a very slight red tint in there. If I maybe flushed it 10, 15 more times, it could be a lot more clear than this, but yeah, at this point, I'm gonna move on to the next step. You guys can do it as much as you want until you're satisfied with the final outcome. But for the sake of the video, I'm gonna proceed to the actual draining portion of the video. All right, so once you guys are happy with the final outcome, it's time to drain the liquid and pour in your new coolant. So we're gonna go and shut off the power supply. And then we are going to open up the valve. Also, don't forget to open up the top plug, let some air in the system. What you can do next is try and tilt the system a little bit to try and get out as much liquid that's trapped in there as you can. You can also use the EK leak tester kit to blow an air into your system to kind of push out any remaining liquid in there. Next thing left to do is remove any of the liquid that's still trapped inside the system. So we're gonna start off with this tube over here, which doesn't have that much water inside. So what we're gonna do is loosen up the fitting. And as soon as I pull this tube out, I'm gonna position it downwards. That way the liquid can drain straight into the bucket. Also, it's really important to have some paper towels handy just in case. That way we can catch any excess liquid from dripping. Afterwards, we can go ahead and put it back in. Lock the cap. I'm gonna do this for the rest of the tubes and the blocks to get out as much liquid as I can from the system before we start pouring in the new coolant. All right, so now that we flushed the system and drained as much water from there as we can, it's time to move on to filling it back up. It's okay if there's still some distilled water inside your tubes or water blocks. It's gonna mix fine with your coolant or whatever it is you're gonna be pouring back into your system. All right, so as I mentioned before, we are switching over to clear coolant. So I'm gonna be pouring in mod water from these guys at Mod My Mods. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this in our fill bottle. Make sure your power supply is turned off before you plug the cable back in. Make sure the drain valve is closed, and we're going to start filling the system. Alright, so once it's almost topped off, we can go ahead and hit the switch on the back of the power supply to turn it on and activate the pump. Remember, once the reservoir starts getting low, we shut the power supply off. It's okay if you guys see a bunch of foams or bubbles in your liquid. It's gonna settle down eventually, so let your system run for about 30 minutes, and this is a good time to check for leaks as well. So as the water and the air bubbles in your system start settling down, you might need to add a little bit more coolant or distilled water back into your system. So just make sure your reservoir is topped off. So once it's topped off, you can go ahead and close the port or the cap of your reservoir, depending on what you're using. And finally, we can disconnect the soft tubing. We don't need this anymore. And remove the fitting and plug up your drain valve. And you're done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do maintenance on your water-cooled system. It's looking like a brand new PC. Well, almost, minus the buildup around the rubber gaskets. But overall, it's looking really good. The only thing left to do is obviously shut up the system and then plug your cables back inside your motherboard, and you are good to go. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, or at the very least learned something from it. If you did and want to see more types of these videos in the future, consider leaving a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more PC content coming up very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I'll see you very soon in the next one.